So the last line I want to touch upon is margin fishing. Now, fishing in the springtime, there is fish still to be caught in the margins, but you've got to think about what you're doing just a little bit more carefully. What we learned from fishing across was that 2.5 foot was a reasonable depth to get bites in. So therefore, I'm going to look for a similar depth down the margins as well. Now, if I pick 2.5 foot, say 3-4 metres away from yourself, the fish won't feel as safe. So the second thing you need to be looking at is the distance you fish down the edge or down your margin. And that is, for me, a minimum of 7 metres. Today, I'm going to fish about 9-10 metres, and I'm also going to fish next to a little bit of cover. Again, fish will naturally patrol around cover such as platforms, reed beds, things like that. So these are all good things to sort of fish next to, or fish, as long as you've got the depth, fish up against them. And it's just natural fish patrolling areas. Now, like I said, the depth wise, 2.5 foot is fine. Feeding wise, again, we're not going to be feeding loads of bait. You know, in the warmer months, yes, you'd be fishing tighter in against the bank and piling bait in. This time of year, the exact same principles for a cross apply down the edge. So we're only going to be drizzling a few pellets in, fishing for one fish at a time. Margin fishing in the spring is all about just having another option and having it somewhere else to go. Whether it's windy, you know, if it's too windy to fish across and you've got a strong crosswind, you can start your match in the margin. It's not a line where you have to leave it till the last hour and wait for the fish to come in. On canalised lakes like this, the fish are never that far away from yourself, so don't be frightened of going down the margins a little bit early. Don't fish across just because you think it's the right thing to do. There is fish to be had. As long as you've got the depth right and the distance right, then you should start getting a few bites there. So I'll quickly run over the rig again. It's exactly the same as part one, fishing across. Pole pot, little small guru with a sprinkle lid on, because we're going to be drizzling micros in exactly the same. Pink hydro elastic, 017 main line, again, little back shot, 0.3 of a gram float, wire stem, it's just an F1 Wilkie Slim. The shotting pattern, again, strung out bulk, 4-inch hook length of 011 N gauge, finished off with an 18's SLWG. And like I said, the principle is exactly the same, whether we're fishing in the margins or the cross, because the depth is the same. We're fishing further enough away from ourselves, and that's all we need to do with this. So that's the rig sorted. Let's jump into the plumbing up and I'll talk you through that and what we're looking for. Like I said, I'm probably fishing about 9-10 metres down this edge. And you might be wondering, well, what's making you fish where you fish? Well, my rig's 2.5 foot deep, and what I'm looking for is, when I pick my marker, so initially that's where I'm looking to plumb up. Again, body out of the water, so I'm probably about 1 inch over depth, but by the time my rig relaxes, my rig's just going to sit nicely. I'm not fishing right in, because it'll shallow up, so there, behind the back of this, the water is probably going to be like 10 inches shallower. So you're probably only fishing in like 16 inches all of a sudden, and it's too shallow for this time of the year. So what I'm looking for is to just come away from the bank slightly, find where the bottom's nice and flat. So you can see from, say, there, it's just starting to drop all the way into sort of the reed bed. It only changes in about 1 inch, 1.5 inches. So I'm just going to pick the nice flat spot here. The reason I'm not fishing right up against the reeds is because of debris. I can pick rubbish up on my hook and things like that, which is going to lead to liners and not much turning into a bite. The reason for that is obviously that all the reed beds have sort of died off over the winter, so try and come away from them slightly. I'm probably only about 1 foot off them, but that there is perfect for plumbing up. 2.5 foot deep, a nice distance away from myself. The shelf itself, if I come out, say, another 2 foot, you'll see the shelf drops right off. Probably got full depth of my rig there, so I've probably got 4.5 foot, and it's going to be going into the deep water there. So all I'm doing is just finding the edge of the shelf, which is there, but obviously that's on a little bit of a slope. So I don't want to fish on the slope, because if it's windy, your bait can move off it. So I'm just coming in, another 4 to 5 inches. That's a nice flat bottom, and that's why I'm choosing to fish where I'm choosing. Flat bottom, nice dinner plate for the fish to feed off, away from the debris of the reed bed, not on that slopey bit where it's going to make it hard to present your bait, and not too shallow, not too tight into the edge, so that the fish are not going to feel safe and come in there, because the water's still a little bit cold. So that's plumbing up. So let's run you through the process of margin fishing then. if you sort of imagine the scenario where you've been fishing across, you've been fishing down the middle, how would you go about feeding this when you're not fishing it? For me, it's just a case of using it as another line. So today we're fishing down the right hand side margin. I could also open up another line and do exactly the same down the left hand margin. All I'm going to do is, while I ship across, maybe early in the session, is just drizzle a few pellets there. So I'm not putting any big pots in or anything like that. I'm basically just priming it for when I need it. Not necessarily later on in the session, but just dripping a bit of bait there so the fish get used to it, and then when I drop on it I'm not waiting as much. So exactly the same as across. Fill my pot up, 3/4 full, just give enough room for them pellets to bounce out. And then I'm fishing on the end of my section this time, so that is my marker. My other marker is a little post on the far bank, a little peg. I'm going to look at that, turn my pot round, drizzle a few pellets in. Again, not feeding loads of bait. You know, if the fish are there and they start feeding a lot more aggressively, some days you can get warm spring days and the fish will feed a lot more aggressive. Other days like today, it looks nice and warm, but it's actually a real cold northerly wind, so the fishing can be a little bit slower, but we'll feed to our bites. And when you hear people say feed to your bites, it doesn't mean if you don't have a bite for an hour, don't feed. You know, you have to feed regular whenever you're fishing across or in the margins, but if you're getting bites, you can feed a little bit more often, a little bit quicker. You know, it's all about gauging the response of the fish. Now, in the spring, like I said, you have got options of catching fish in the margins. You know, follow them principles, fishing in the right depth, fishing far enough away from yourself so the fish feel safe. But one of the big advantages of margin fishing is you naturally do catch a slightly better stamp fish. You know, you'll still catch the smaller fish as well. So I've just hooked into my first fish down there. You'll still catch the F1's and the stockies and everything else, but it's amazing how many times you do catch an odd better stamp of fish. So I've just been dropping, so there's one of the older F1's, probably a two and a bit pound. But yeah, like I was saying, you don't treat it any differently to what you would do when you're fishing across. Sometimes you can catch a little bit quicker because you're fishing that little bit closer. And other days, like, you know, other things to think of is like, some days you'll catch better in the margin because the sun's on it or because the sun's not on it. You know, it can work both ways. It depends how cold it is. And what I mean by that is, the peg now is a perfect example. Across there, the sun is shining on my far bank. Down the margin, I've got a bit of shade from the tree cover. Now, some days this can work against you, and other days it can be in your favour because the fish will sit out of the shade a little bit. So all these key factors, these are all things you want to be looking out for. So if you go down one side, doesn't mean to say you won't catch down the other side. So straight away, I've had another little bite, so just dropping a few pellets there all day, just priming this up, and as soon as I've gone on it, the fish are there, and hopefully I'm getting a few signs now. So again, a few pellets in, sprinkling them pellets out, probably only 30 pellets, and just treating it exactly the same as me across fishing. Same depth of water, same rig, same principle feeding, and that is what springtime margin fishing is all about. Now, when it comes to presenting your rig, obviously when you're fishing across, you're fishing in a straight line in front of you, and you'll lift your rig and you'll let it catch up. Because you're fishing on an angle down the side, what you want to be doing is sort of feeding your bait. So I'm going to tap my pellets in, and then I want to lay my rig out towards the deeper bit and just let it naturally fall into the shelf. And then once I feel like, right, my rig's caught up, it's right on top of where I've fed, then I can start to lower it in. If you let your rig settle, sometimes it'll pull your float down the shelf. So if you're fishing near a slope or anything like that, always make sure your rig fully catches up before you lower it down. There's no rush because your pellets are falling through the water anyway, but that's just a good little tip. When you're fishing side on, lay it out towards that deeper water, let it come into the bank, and then lower it down right on top of your bait.